Disclaimer: the contents within this video are supplemental to the safety lessons taught in class by the tech ed teacher and is not the definitive last word on the subject at hand. No person or student should attempt to follow any of the safety guidelines herein or use equipment until they receive safety training from the tech ed teacher within the shop itself and only after completing their safety demonstration and written test. When using the vertical bandsaw, the first thing to do is set the blade gap or the guard height. To do that, there are two ways. The first one is to place your material on the table, lift the guard, and set it approximately 1/8 of an inch above your material and lock it down. There we go. So the gap is no more than 1/8 of an inch. If you're not familiar with how much 1/8 is, on the string hanging from the table is a shim. The shim plate is 1/8 of an inch, and it can be placed on top. Guard sits on top, tighten it down, remove the shim, and now we have this base set properly. When using the bandsaw, we want to make sure we keep our fingers away from the blade. There is a minimum distance that we must keep our fingers away from this blade. That is the throat plate. Our fingers should never touch the throat plate. They should also never be in line with the blade. So I can come up to here, I can go on either side of it, but my fingers should never come up in front, as well as never touching the throat plate. When cutting small objects like this, we want to keep our fingers away from the throat plate, away from the blade. To do this, we'll use the push stick. This push stick has two handles that let us grip it tightly and lets us push, keeping our fingers away from the blade, and we can manipulate it safely as needed. Use the push stick. The vertical bandsaw in the shop here has a 3/4 inch blade. This means it cannot cut curves, such as this. If we wanted to cut this curve, we could not do it unless we use relief cuts. Relief cuts are cuts we make in a straight line into the curve that we want to make, approximately 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch apart. As our blade cuts between each line, it's a straight cut, another straight cut, and these little pieces fall away, and we end up with what we call a faceted cut, little flats all the way around, simulating the curve. And then we can take it to the belt grinder and we can round it smooth. Looks like this. There's our relief cuts. Now we can make cuts in between each one. Straight cuts in between each of the other cuts. And now I can take that to the belt grinder and smooth it off. Having just made some cuts, I have little pieces of material, in this case cardboard, surrounding the blade underneath the guard. I do not reach in there with the machine running to remove those. I stop the machine, I lift the guard, and then I remove them carefully and safely with the machine off. Let us say, for example, that we just cut a big piece of metal. We have a lot of blade exposed here. Regardless of the guard height, when we're done cutting, we always lower the guard. We do it for two reasons. The first one is to protect the blade from damage. Somebody walking by could smack that with a piece of metal and damage the blade. The blade could break on the next operator, which would be a problem. It could be unsafe. The second reason is this blade is exposed, and if you were to trip and fall and run your hand onto it and then down it, it would cut you just as badly as if it was running. You can see that in this example with this piece of cardboard. If I fell into it, that's what could happen to your hand. So to prevent that, at the end of every cut, before you walk away from the machine, loosen the guard locking knob and lower the guard and walk away. This is good also because it forces the next operator to set the height of the guard, thus keeping us all safe. Cutting round or irregular shaped objects such as this pipe can be done on the saw, but it must be done safely. When you go to push this into the blade, it's going to roll and it's going to kick back at you and hit you. Or it could roll and pinch your fingers underneath the material, which would also be painful. To safely cut, so what we would do is we grab this vise, which is always kept at the bandsaw, and we mount our pipe into it, or a piece of metal, whatever the case may be. Tighten it down, and now we can use this pipe in the vise and we can make our cut. In order to do that, we are going to have to raise our guard up to the height of the vise, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to cut it. And we just push it down along the blade. There is one key point that we need to make sure of, and that is when we cut, the blade should go down the side, just touching the side of the vise. If you're not scratching the paint, you're not close enough, and there's a reason for that. If we go and we cut far away from the vise, we risk it tipping. So we can best see that if we look at it this way. If I push down here, nothing happens. But if I push down here, the vise tips. Nothing happens, the vise tips. So you want to cut nice and close right down the side of the vise. Scratch the paint. I'd rather you scratch the paint than have an accident. When using the bandsaw, it is possible for the blade to break. If it does break, there are two things you need to do. The first one, shut off the bandsaw. You can do that by pressing the stop button located at the front of the machine. The second thing you need to do is tell your teacher the blade broke. The chances of a blade breaking are fairly minimal. In 10 years, we have not had a blade break. However, it is more likely the blade will pop off the wheels inside the machine, behind the covers. Again, shut her off and tell me. If the blade does break, the most likely place for the blade to come out is either on top or down below, on the right-hand side of the machine, when you're standing in front of it. If the guard is properly adjusted, the blade shouldn't have any ability to pop out the top, but it can still come out the bottom. That is why you never stand here when you're cutting, nor do you allow anybody to stand in this area when you are cutting. If somebody wants to watch you cut, they can be on the front side or behind you, but never standing right here. When using the vertical bandsaw, the safety required at a minimum is your safety glasses, as always. It is a loud operating machine sometimes, depending on the material cut, and you may want to get some earmuffs to protect your hearing. When in doubt, put the safety gear on, put muffs on, you'll be fine. This is your start button. This is your stop button. In this last clip, we're going to make 2 cuts and observe all safety on this in its entirety. We're going to make 2 cuts, one where both hands are on either side of the blade going through, and one cut where both hands are on one side of the blade going through, making sure that my arm never crosses the path of the blade. Looks like this. We get our material, in this case cardboard. It's cheap and easy on the machine. Get our shim up. The word up goes up. Tighten it down, shim comes out. We've got our movement. Turning it on. One hand on either side. Wait till it shuts down, then come in here and pull our material out. Lower our guard, and that is the safe operation of the vertical bandsaw.